Strap yourself in, Keir Starmer, and start doing some leading.
Really delighted to see that James O'Brien has finally joined us in the campaign to moan and push against Brexit. Sadly, since Brexit happened, James went into the league of we have to just live with Brexit, as if you would live with something like leprosy, even though there's a treatment for it. And he's suddenly woken up to the reality that any sensible leader would act to get rid of Brexit in the national interest, particularly after what we've been through with Trump and other events, with the need to remilitarise and the threat from Russia, Trump withdrawing from NATO, Trump crashing the global economy.
Blimey, what happened then? I got about halfway through that monologue and I felt my dander rising in a way that it hasn't risen for many years, I think. And I haven't diagnosed this before. I think I've been a bit cautious when it comes to returning to this territory because it's over, you know, that ship sailed. There's no such thing as remain, despite the rhetoric of some people. You can't remain in something that you've already left. You can return, you can rejoin, but you can't remain. And yet I haven't felt passionate about the subject in a long time because there didn't seem any point in being passionate. Some of you have been cross with me latterly for lacking passion or for thinking that this was something that needed to be put on hold or that needed to be put in the fridge and that we would return to it in the next electoral cycle or we would return to it when the time was right. And I could still defend that position because, as John Maynard Keynes almost certainly didn't say, when the facts change, I change my mind, sir. What do you do? And if the facts haven't changed this week, if you don't think the facts have changed this week with Donald Trump's epic tantrum, then I'm afraid you never will. That was genuine. Oh, blimey. I've almost forgotten what that felt like. That cold fury at all of the people who told us up was down, black was white. The German car industry would come galloping to our rescue. They needed us more than we needed them. The country can't recover, can it? The country can't recover until you restore reality, let alone reversing Brexit. That might be the next chapter in the book. But you can't restore the country unless you restore reality. And we're still, nobody more than Keir Starmer, we're still operating in this straitjacket of respect for people or respect for opinions that have been proven to be completely wrong. So why doesn't he tell them to sit down? Answer, Nigel Farage is doing very well in the polls. Well, remind everybody what a Herbert he is. Remind them of the nonsense he's talked about, everything from Liz Truss's budget to the future of the British fishing industry. Strap yourself in, Keir Starmer, and start doing some leading. It's word, isn't it? And it's not as loaded as rejoin. Stuart's in Yorkshire. He writes, "Hi, James. I disagree with you on almost everything." That's always a good way to open a text, Stuart. I prefer, James, I love you, but... That's more likely to get read out, but all human life is here. But as a Brexit voter, I now realise it was a massive mistake. Trump's madness has highlighted why we need to realign with Europe. Rich writes, "You and the rest who voted Remain have the moral victory. Sadly, I believe the lies that the NHS would have millions extra spent on it. Remember the little red bus? It was a big red bus, mate. And we'd have more money for infrastructure rather than sending it all to the EU. I find now that the people still supporting Brexit are very right-wing and generally against everything. The shame some of us feel for putting the whole country through this is immense. We need another referendum so the people who were lied to can right the wrong. It wouldn't even be a close vote. Keep up the good work, James." Richard, also in Yorkshire, specifically in Doncaster. I don't know. I don't know that we're ready for another referendum. It's only this morning. And thank you to everyone, all the pedants who've pointed out it's 3 shredded wheat that I've had for breakfast, metaphorically, not 3 Weetabix, but I feel quite liberated by the realisation that the old Japanese proverb is correct. If you get on the wrong train, then the sooner you get off, you got to get off at the next station. Otherwise, everything gets worse. The mistake gets compounded with every stop you pass. Getting back to where you should be gets harder and harder and harder. And this timidity that Keir Starmer demonstrates, particularly in the context of this column in The Economist yesterday, which I urge you to read, under the byline Badger, but written by a chap called Duncan Robinson. And the idea that he is enthralled to a constituency of voters that largely doesn't exist because of demographics and death, makes an even greater mockery of the idea that he's displaying pragmatism and caution rather than cowardice or timidity.
All of the years that James spent fighting Brexit on LBC, he knows full well how corrupt it was and how wrong it was. And here we are, 9 years nearly since that vote. How many people have passed away since that vote? Millions. How many people have turned 18 since that vote? Millions. And they are trapped in Brexit land because governments are telling the people that they have to respect the votes of people who have left this planet. It's just bonkers. So perhaps now that James has joined us, there might be a bit more pressure on the Labour government and an end to this lunacy of trying to get a dodgy trade deal with Donald Trump.
Brexit. Conversations about the European Union prior to 2019, prior to that ludicrous so-called oven-ready deal, delivering absolutely none of the things that all the architects and champions of Brexit had promised it would deliver. The conversations have been a little strange for two reasons. One is at this end of the telescope, and the other is at the other end of the telescope. At this end of the telescope, Keir Starmer's timidity now has become impossible to ignore. I'm no longer minded to defend the idea that pragmatism demands that he stays away from this territory. It doesn't make sense to me in the context of what has happened in the last few days that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom would be doing anything other than trying to rebuild bridges with our biggest trading partners, with our former co-members of the most successful single market in the history of humanity. One front page this morning states UK moves closer to softer Brexit as hopes fade for quick US deal. Opinion polls are not science, but they show extraordinary movement on this issue. They show a majority of people here absolutely persuaded not only that Brexit has been a disaster, but that we need to start working to undo some elements of it as soon as possible. And those opinion polls were heading north long before Donald Trump tore up the natural order, tore up all the norms, all the and good Lord, I very nearly swore then, and messed up. Good grief! I don't think I've come that close. Poor old Keith will be having an embolism. I don't think I've come that close to using a very naughty word in a very long time. But he messed up on such a spectacular scale that even some of the chief cheerleaders are going to have to swallow a slice of humble pie or temporarily tell the truth about the mango Mussolini, when obviously normal business demands that they lie about him through their teeth endlessly. So the Ming vase across the ice rink, an analogy we really loved, I think is now completely the wrong tactic. Lauren picks up this point. He's a nearly militant hedger, James. The thing about his Ming vase is that the strategy is only worth it if the vase contains something you can deposit when you get to the other side of the ice rink. If the vase is empty, a fragile, essentially futile container, then carrying it carefully across the ice is pointless. Wendy takes up the point. He's trying to use the Ming vase strategy that he used before, while Trump and Musk are recklessly waving a sledgehammer around the place. And those are the two positions that we're going to examine today. UK moves closer to softer Brexit as hopes fade for quick US deal. Ask a Labour politician about this, and they are almost sounding like Reform UK candidates when it comes to the certainty with which they state that we will never go back, we will never undo, we will never reverse. And yet today, Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Minister for EU Relations, says, and I quote, that it's time to move to the next level. He talks about a softer Brexit, and I quote again, to keep our people safe. Rachel Reeves attends a meeting of EU finance ministers today, where she will seek deeper cooperation on defence financing. The French, for the record, are being very stupid at the moment, in my opinion. The French are trying to tie unity on defence spending to fishing rights. And again, I know that Brexit was supposed to make the lives of British fishermen and fisher folk infinitely better, and the people who promised that it would have completely abandoned the fishing industry and gone completely silent. But the idea that the French would prioritise fishing over unity on defence spending is palpably absurd. I hope it's a sort of hollow negotiating tactic rather than a meaningful roadblock to progress. But the trade agreement with the US is more or less off the table. I don't think anybody is going to avoid this 10% baseline tariff rate. That's why the markets started falling again after yesterday's massive rally. And the 25% on cars is something that Keir Starmer is going to be desperate to get removed, but nobody, and this is the point about certainty and confidence, nobody can actually budget or legislate for a future in which the 25% tariff on the import of British cars into the United States of America is lifted or reduced. I guess the best chance is to see it reduced to 10%. So, Selina, you're not the first person to ask whether my next book will be called How They Broke the World. At the moment, I'm not sure I'm qualified to write it, and I'm not sure that the world has actually broken. Donald Trump's best efforts notwithstanding, the system did resist. The bond market did do to him what it did to Liz Truss and force a U-turn, force a reversal. So, is there any rationale whatsoever to cautious path when it comes to EU relations? Who are these mythical voters that he is, or theoretical voters, putative voters, that he is so worried about upsetting? There's a brilliant column in The Economist yesterday, in the Badgett column, which pointed out that demographically an awful lot of the voters that Keir Starmer seems to be most worried about offending have sadly passed away. It's a demographic calculation, don't shoot the messenger, that if you're looking at the politics of 2016, then an awful lot of the people who were most wedded to the mythology and the nonsense punted largely by a Daily Telegraph correspondent called Boris Johnson, I wonder what happened to him, have now shuffled off this mortal coil. It is as if Keir Starmer is pandering to a constituency that in many ways no longer exists. So why would he not now move further and faster towards much closer cooperation and much greater unity with the European Union than he has currently demonstrated? I want you to...
Ultimately, if you bought something and it ended up being absolutely the opposite of what you thought it was, and in fact it was damaging you, what would you do? Of course you would take it back, get rid of it. It's nonsensical that we're carrying on thinking that we just have to stick with Brexit, like we voted for leprosy, so let's just carry on having leprosy until it kills us.